Have you ever looked at something and just be like, that can't be right? But then you look closely and you think, yes, that is correct. But then you have to ask the question, why do they suck? They don't look like suckers, but they do suck. And some of you may be thinking, we're talking about football, right? And I'm like, well, if you clicked on this video and you saw the title, you know that I'm just leading you all on a way of innuendo jokes to make you think of one thing, but really, we're not that perverted on this channel. So, let's get introduction out of the way. Hey everybody, I'm Cortez, and I'm a critic, and welcome back. We're continuing our 2025 NFL recap of the season, and today we are in the NFC North. And the team I'm talking about the most, that I feel like they suck, but they're not really suckers, is the Minnesota Vikings. And if you think I was talking about another team that sucked, don't worry. I'm talking about them very, very soon. Let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings and why they don't suck. Alright, for those Minnesota fans out there that are basically a few seconds away from being like, where do you live? I'm going to say, I'm sorry, but the Vikings, I don't know what you are, but you're technically supposed to be a bad team, but your record says no. And then when you look closer, you're like, yeah, they are a bad team, maybe? But then you realize they are literally one win away from having 10 wins. When the season started, I was very optimistic about J.J. McCarthy. And now I am not. But I am still realizing that he is the future for the Vikings, so we have to deal with what we have to deal. But 9-8 was my ceiling, but if things just chipped off because, Sam Darnold's gone, and who knows what he's going to do in Seattle. Not win a Super Bowl, they said. And now we're realizing 7-10. But you guys win 9-8. And you're probably thinking, well, 9-8, that's a good record. 9-8 is a good record, yeah. Yeah, for a team that's going through a lot and had 13 wins the year before, but with a new quarter and everything, 9-8 is not a bad start. And then you realize, man, one win away from a 10-win season, that's not a bad start. But then you realize, how do we go 9-8? And there it is. That's the clicker. When you think of the Vikings, I can't help but feel like a lot of people are like having this really like, really? They were 9-8? But they suck. They were terrible. And I'm like, I know. I thought they were a bad team too. Even with Jefferson doing so much by himself. But with McCarthy being in there, you're just like, no, they are a bad team. But they went 9-8. And trust me, there are some games on the schedule I'm like, yeah, they would have won that game. It could have changed the tide. Yeah, there's some games here where you think close, like, there's probably even 2 games they probably should have won that could have put them at 11 wins, and they probably in the playoffs, and then we'll be thinking, they are a good team, but the quarterback situation is in the flux. So, the big one that I will say for the Vikings was week 9 versus Detroit. Detroit was still having that feeling of we are superior. We own the North. We are still the team to beat. Even though by this time Chicago still was on an upswing, but no one was really thinking, they're going to fall eventually. Green Bay was always that looming threat, and Detroit was the dominant force. So take all that away, you look at the Vikings and thinking, we already have you as the fourth worst team in this division. So just accept that as it is. Which is kind of funny because technically they're not the fourth worst team, but everyone in the NFC North had 9 or more wins. So that's kind of funny. Everyone had a winning record. That type of division. And it still boggles the mind to think Minnesota was a 9-win team. But the Detroit game was very interesting because Detroit, I feel like their identity was the successful continuing journey of Gibbs, their running back. So going to this game and to see that the Detroit Lions only have 65 yards rushing, it's like, wait, what? And the leading rusher was Montgomery, 40 yards on 11 carries. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like JJ. JJ only threw for like 143 yards. The leading receiver for the Vikings was Addison, who only had 48 yards. And the running back they had, which was Jones Sr., Aaron Jones, had 78. So nobody on the offensive side of the Vikings really blew up statistically wise. And you look at that, you're thinking, oh, man, it's a turnover. And I'm like, no, turnovers are even 1-1. So my question to you will be, what happened? What changed? What happened? And I'm like, I really don't know. This is a case of division games are a weird mystery. And sometimes when you least expect it, things happen. Now, Detroit was having an injury problem when it comes to their secondary. But like I said, McCarthy didn't tear that deep secondary apart either. So what was the problem? I can't help for looking at statistically, unless you watch the game from beginning to end, there's just a case of the Vikings just took advantage of opportunities. The Vikings just took advantage of what was given, and Detroit didn't. This was just a clear case of, pardon me, they just took advantage. It's a division foe. It's the Vikings' best game. The level of competition was there. The game was at Detroit. Home field advantage, and the Vikings took care of it. And the Vikings, I'll tell you, were probably coming in going, I have no faith. I have no faith. And this probably was a game that I think a lot of Detroit fans were thinking, okay, we take care of division foe, we solidify ourselves in the division, and we move ourselves forward. Not saying Detroit players did that, it just comes off as, what happened? Now, like I said, that was their best game. The worst game was probably more what people think about when they think about the Vikings. And that was Week 12 at Green Bay. This was the game where it really was, I don't see how the Vikings have a team. That Packer defense destroyed anything the Vikings could do. That Packer team, because the game was a 23-6. So it wasn't like the Packers, put the foot. This was a game that just felt like every time the Vikings reached for something, there was a Packer player just step on the hand. Every time the Vikings had something positive, the next play, the Packer would smack in the mouth, would shut it down. It was just a game of just... Because I think I remember watching some of it, whether I was waiting for the next game or what, and I was just like, man, the Vikings just can't buy anything. They can barely buy a first down. They can barely buy a completion. And it was and the thing about this is that it was 6-10 for most of the game. Until the third and fourth quarter where the Packers just finished it off. But for most of it, I mean, looking at the stat-wise, 93 yards rushing for the Vikings, 52 yards passing, 30 turnovers. While Green Bay was balanced, 146 rushing, 142 passing. Not really a blowout game, but I'm telling you, those sacks and turnovers, they dictate a lot more than you expect. That was the biggest indication of this game. When you watch it, it was kind of sloppy. Not to be too mean, but it was kind of sloppy. You're watching and going, man, these guys were just couldn't get a break. Just couldn't get a break. And I think for a lot of Packer fans, they were saying this is what the Packers were going to do. This is why you got Michael Parsons. This is why the defense is going to be legit. This was the idea. Once the Packers offense figured out something, that Packers defense was going to carry us further. And it was a game where just McCarthy just couldn't catch a break. It was a division foe, and Green Bay had their number this time. So all right, that's how it was. But it was I think when people think of the Vikings, they think of this performance of last year. Because that's how I think about it. That's why when I was doing these videos, I was like, 9-8, really? Man, when I think of the Vikings, I think of Week 12 at Green Bay, not Week 9 at Detroit, and certainly not Week 1 against Chicago. So, MVP for the Vikings. Almost the wrong team. I'm giving it to the fans again. I know I've been saying to the fans a lot, but it has to be an MVP for the team. For the team has to be more than just stats. Sometimes it is just stats. You can easily say, well, give it to Justin Jefferson. And clearly, he was the most superior player on the team. And I'll be saying, yes, you're right. He was probably the most superior player on the team. But when do we stop saying, but of course he is? Jefferson has always been statistically one of the best receivers, not just in his team, but in the league. Jefferson had over 1,000 yards. Evans had, 10 straight years of 1,000 yards? But he was never considered an MVP. He just did his job. Now, if Jefferson had 1,400 yards, I can see the argument. But Jefferson had over 1,000 yards. And honestly, for a guy of his caliber, just barely over 1,000 yards is standard. That's a standard Justin Jefferson season because he's that standard. He is a standard 1,000 plus yard receiver, regardless of his quarterback, because this is a case of the receiver makes the quarterback better than the other way around. So to me, that is why I give it to the fans, because this was a 9-win team, and one of their wins was against Detroit on Thanksgiving, or was it Christmas Eve? I think it was. And that game, we'll talk about that later, because I'm foreshadowing the future, because you kind of know what I'm going to talk about when that time comes. Grade for the Vikings, had a winning record, but it was just like fake, so I'm giving it a D. Kind of a downward, the productivity of last year. Maybe D for Donald. D for happened? That happened? What happened? Like I said, they went 9-8, but it just doesn't feel like a 9-8 team. It doesn't feel like a team that was probably one missed field goal here and there away from getting 10 wins. Like, it just felt like, wow, this team had 9 wins? It still baffles the mind. And I'm sure there's some Viking fans that are going like, oh yeah, we did go 9-8. It doesn't feel like we were 9-8. Exactly. Now, when it comes to the draft, I am focusing strictly on defense. I feel like offensively, you're not going to fix the quarterback problem in this draft class, especially not at number 18. But defensively, especially with certain players that are out, and I'm going to say that this first guy is probably more than likely the guy, but in case something happens, he might not be. But I feel like because of Harrison Smith's absence now for the Vikings, with the 18th overall pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Minnesota Vikings select Dylan Thiemann, the safety from Oregon. His draft stocks has been rising week in, the past few days. And I've seen him go as high as 12th. I've seen him go as high, potentially a top 10 pick if a team is very desperate for his talents. But yeah, his draft stocks has been very high the past few days. And I feel like this is one of those players that draft is so high that I feel like with Harrison Smith gone, this is like the perfect replacement. So Dylan will probably be more than likely, I will probably agree with some of the mock drafts that he'll more likely be the guy unless otherwise. But let's say he gets picked up by, I don't know, Tampa or somebody. Then I feel like they need to go with the line. I feel like they're still missing the loss of Hunter, so this might be a project player, but it might be the perfect spot. Keldrick Falk, defensive end Auburn. Get him in there, get him rotation, get development. The Dallas Turner thing, is it considered a bust? I mean, let me just let's take a quick look at Dallas Turner stats. Let me see. He led the team with 8 sacks. And Andrew Van Ginkel had 7, so I'm going to say he's not a bust, but let's give him a number 2. So Kendrick Falk makes sense. Plus, how cool would it be having Alabama and an Auburn as your sack masters? Kind of cool story. But if they want to go interior to help stop the run, then I go with Peter Woods, defensive tackle, Clemson. Get something to plug up that middle. That's how I feel like the Vikings would go. I mean, I can see linebackers here and there, but I feel like we can probably feel safe. He's either going to be Dylan from Oregon or defense in the first round. That's what we say. And that is the Vikings. Next, we're going to go to Chicago and talk about the Bears, who won the division, who people are a little kind of high on the Caleb Williams, protein shake, Kool-Aid. And I'm sitting in the corner going, nope. Nope. But I will still give him credit because he did show great promise, and it also proves to my long-time mythology of psychology of thinking, coaching does matter. And sometimes it helps even the young quarterbacks get better faster. So until next time, I'm Cortez, and I'm a critic. Thank you so very much for watching.